This story is titled, I discovered my roommate had been secretly recording my private conversations for months, then used them to turn all our friends against me. Looking back at everything that happened in Burlington, Vermont last year, I still can't believe how quickly my entire social life imploded. I'm Rachel, 22F, and until 6 months ago, I was living what I thought was my best life, sharing a cozy 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate Madison, 24F, near the University of Vermont campus where we both attended grad school. I had met Madison through our mutual friend Emma, 23F, during my senior year of undergrad. Emma and I had been close since freshman year, bonding over our shared love of indie music and horror movies. When my previous roommate moved out to live with her boyfriend, Emma suggested Madison, who had just been accepted into the Environmental Sciences graduate program. Madison seemed perfect. She was clean, quiet, organized, and we clicked immediately over our shared interest in sustainable living and plant-based cooking. Our friend group was tight-knit and drama-free. Besides Emma, there was Josh, 25M, a local barista who hosted our weekly movie nights, Olivia, 23F, my study partner from the psychology department, and Chris, 24M, Madison's colleague from her program, who would often join us for weekend hikes. We were that typical post-college crowd who thought we had it all figured out, career paths ahead of us, supportive friends around us, and the freedom of early 20s life. Madison and I fell into an easy rhythm as roommates. She would make enough coffee for both of us in the morning, and I would always pick up her favorite oat milk when I did grocery runs. We'd spend Sunday afternoons meal prepping together, sharing stories about our classes, our families, and our dating lives. I trusted her completely, often confiding in her about my ongoing therapy sessions dealing with my parents' messy divorce, my struggles with imposter syndrome in grad school, and my complicated feelings for Chris, who I had been secretly crushing on for months. What I didn't know then was that Madison had been methodically collecting every personal detail I shared, every vulnerable moment, every private conversation I had in my own room, recording it all through a hidden device she had planted shortly after moving in. I had no idea that my safe space, my home, had been compromised from the very beginning. The worst part? I would never have discovered her betrayal if it wasn't for that one stormy night in October when everything started to unravel. If only I had noticed the subtle signs sooner, the way Madison would sometimes bring up topics I had only discussed in private phone calls, how she always seemed to know exactly when to push my emotional buttons, or how our friends had started acting slightly different around me. But hindsight is 20/20ths, and by the time I realized what was happening, Madison had already set her plan in motion to systematically destroy every friendship I had built over the past 4 years. The night that changed everything started like any other typical October evening. I was on the phone with my therapist, having our weekly virtual session from my bedroom. Madison was supposedly at a late study group, so I felt comfortable speaking openly about some recent developments in my life. I had finally worked up the courage to ask Chris out for coffee the previous week, and though he had seemed interested, he had been acting strangely distant ever since. As I was discussing my confusion over Chris's behavior with my therapist, a massive thunderstorm knocked out the power in our building. In the sudden silence and darkness, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a faint electronic beeping coming from behind my dresser. Using my phone's flashlight, I investigated the sound and discovered a small recording device, its backup battery apparently failing in the power outage. My hands were shaking as I examined the device. It was expertly hidden, tucked behind my dresser in a spot where the charging cord could be easily mistaken for part of my string light's wiring. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some random occurrence. Someone had deliberately placed this device to record my private conversations, and given the positioning and access required, there was only one person who could have done it. I wish I could say I confronted Madison immediately, but fear and disbelief kept me frozen. Instead, I carefully documented everything with photos and left the device exactly where I found it. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing through every private conversation I'd had in my room over the past months. Every secret shared, every vulnerable moment, every tearful phone call with my mom about the divorce, all of it had been captured and collected by someone I trusted. The next few days were a masterclass in acting normal while my world crumbled internally. I watched Madison with new eyes, noticing things I had previously dismissed, like how she always seemed to check her phone right after I had private conversations in my room. or how she would casually bring up extremely personal details about my life in conversations with our friends, details I had never shared with anyone but my therapist. The final piece clicked into place when Emma canceled our traditional Thursday coffee meetup, claiming she was swamped with work. This was unusual enough, but then I spotted her an hour later at our usual cafe sitting with Madison and Olivia. Through the window, I could see them in what appeared to be an intense discussion, with Madison showing them something on her phone. The look of disgust and disappointment on their faces told me everything I needed to know. Madison wasn't just recording my conversations for her own twisted entertainment, she was actively using them against me, carefully selecting and sharing private moments to turn our friends against me. My heart sank as I realized this explained the growing distance I'd felt from everyone lately. The canceled plans, the awkward group dynamics, Chris's sudden coldness. Madison had been orchestrating my social isolation, and I had been completely blind to it. That night, I did something I never thought I'd be capable of. I waited until Madison left for her evening yoga class and searched her room. The guilt of invading her privacy felt overwhelming, but I kept reminding myself that she had already shattered any concept of privacy between us. What I found made me physically ill. Hidden in Madison's desk drawer was a journal filled with detailed notes about my life, organized by date and topic. She had transcribed conversations I'd had with my therapist about my childhood insecurities, late-night calls with my mom about the divorce, and even private moments when I thought I was alone, talking to myself while getting ready for presentations or practicing difficult conversations. But it wasn't just random recordings. She had highlighted specific vulnerabilities and marked them with dates and names, like "Share with Emma Marie Rachel's jealousy issues," or "Tell Chris about therapy sessions." The more I read, the clearer her methodology became. Madison had been systematically collecting my most personal moments and insecurities, then strategically sharing them to paint me as unstable and untrustworthy. She had told Emma about private comments I'd made during moments of frustration about our friendship, taken out of context to make me seem resentful and fake. She had shared my private musings about Chris with Olivia, knowing Olivia would tell him, making me appear obsessive and creepy. But the truly devastating discovery was a series of text messages I found screenshotted and printed out. Madison had been texting with Chris, showing him carefully selected clips of me talking about him during therapy sessions. No wonder he had pulled away. She had violated my most vulnerable moments and used them to destroy any chance I had with him. The messages showed Chris expressing disgust and asking Madison to keep an eye on me because I seemed unstable. The depth of Madison's manipulation went beyond just ruining my friendships. She had applied for the same research grant I was pursuing, and I found notes about using my personal struggles to suggest to faculty members that I might not be emotionally equipped to handle the pressure of the project. She had systematically gathered ammunition to not only destroy my social life, but potentially impact my academic career as well. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal, it was realizing that Madison had never been my friend. Every moment of connection, every late-night conversation, every shared meal and secret had been part of her calculated plan to gather information she could use against me. She had moved in with the specific intention of collecting dirt on me, though I still couldn't understand why she had chosen me as her target. As I carefully returned everything to its exact place in her room, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. A small notebook with a list of names, most of them crossed out. My name was there, along with what appeared to be previous roommates from other cities. Next to each name were notes about successful isolation and target neutralized. The realization hit me. I wasn't Madison's first victim. I was just the latest in a pattern of systematic social destruction that she had perfected over years. I spent the next week in a state of constant anxiety, knowing I needed to act but terrified of making the wrong move. Madison was clearly experienced at this kind of psychological warfare, and one wrong step could make me look exactly like the unstable person she was painting me to be. I needed to be strategic, just as she had been. My first step was to document everything. I used my phone to take photos of the recording device in my room, making sure to capture its location and how it was connected. I also photographed entries from Madison's journal when she was out, being careful to return everything exactly as I found it. The hardest part was continuing to act normal around her, pretending I was still the trusting, oblivious roommate she thought I was. During this time, I noticed Madison had started leaving her laptop open in the kitchen while cooking, always positioned so I could see the screen. On it were usually open emails or text conversations that seemed designed to provoke me discussions with our friends about my concerning behavior, or messages about the research grant I was applying for. I realized she was trying to bait me into confronting her, which would only serve to make me look irrational and prove her point to everyone. The turning point came when I overheard Madison on the phone in her room, talking to someone about her next target, a new grad student in our department named Ashley, 22F. I recorded this conversation on my phone, my hand shaking as I realized she was already planning her next victim, while still in the process of destroying my life. I also started paying attention to patterns in our apartment that I'd previously ignored. Madison always seemed to know when I was about to receive important emails or calls, positioning herself nearby to gauge my reactions. She had somehow figured out my schedule so precisely that she was always around for my most vulnerable moments. It was like living in a carefully choreographed performance, where I was the only one who didn't know the script. But her biggest mistake was her overconfidence. One evening, while I was supposedly at a late study session, I returned home quietly and caught her in my room, adjusting the recording device. She didn't hear me over the sound of her headphones, as she listened to my previous conversations, taking notes in her journal. I recorded several minutes of video on my phone before silently leaving the apartment, finally having concrete proof of her actions. That night, as I sat in a 24-hour coffee shop going through all the evidence I'd gathered, I received a text from Emma asking to meet. Madison had apparently told her that she'd caught me going through her private things in her room. The text was full of disappointment and accusations, suggesting I get professional help. The irony was painful. Madison had anticipated my documentation and was already spinning it against me. I realized then that I couldn't just expose Madison, I needed to dismantle her entire system of manipulation in a way that would leave no doubt about what had really been happening. As I sat there, surrounded by photos of evidence and screenshots of messages, I began to formulate a plan. Madison had spent months carefully building her web of lies, but I had something she didn't expect: the truth, carefully documented, and a growing understanding of exactly how she operated. My plan started with Ashley, Madison's intended next victim. I found her between classes and asked if we could talk somewhere private. Over coffee at an off-campus cafe, I carefully shared my story, showing her some of the evidence I'd gathered. I could see the color drain from her face as she told me Madison had already started love-bombing her with offers of friendship and suggestions about becoming roommates next semester. Ashley revealed something that made my heart stop. Madison had already started telling her concerning things about my mental state, suggesting that Ashley should be careful around me. It was the same pattern starting all over again, but this time, I had intercepted it before Madison could fully sink her claws in. Ashley became my first ally in uncovering the truth. Next, I needed to tackle the biggest obstacle: the way Madison had convinced everyone that I was mentally unstable. I reached out to my therapist and explained the situation. She was horrified to learn that our sessions had been recorded without consent. While she couldn't break confidentiality, she helped me understand how to approach this situation in a way that would make people question Madison's narrative. I decided to start with Olivia, who I knew had a strong sense of justice despite currently believing Madison's lies about me. I sent her a simple text asking to meet at our old study spot in the university library's quiet section. I chose this location carefully. It was where we'd spent countless hours together preparing for exams, a place that held memories of our genuine friendship. When we met, I didn't try to defend myself or make accusations. Instead, I showed her the video I'd taken of Madison in my room with the recording device. The look of shock on Olivia's face as she watched Madison adjusting the equipment and taking notes was exactly what I needed. But what really got to her was when I showed her Madison's notebook with a list of previous victims. Olivia's analytical mind couldn't ignore such clear evidence of premeditation. The most surreal moment came when Olivia confessed that Madison had been feeding her recordings of my private conversations for weeks, but always prefaced them with concerns about my mental health. Madison had perfectly manipulated everyone's protective instincts, making them think they were helping me by keeping their distance. Olivia had genuinely believed she was doing the right thing by pulling away. As Olivia and I talked, pieces started falling into place. She remembered how Madison had done something similar in her undergraduate years, but on a smaller scale. The story had circulated about a crazy roommate who had paranoid delusions about being recorded. Now Olivia realized that roommate had probably been telling the truth. With Olivia's help, I began to understand just how deeply Madison had embedded herself into our friend group's trust. She hadn't just turned them against me, she had positioned herself as the caring friend who was worried about my mental health, the one trying to help me by sharing her concerns with others. She had created a narrative so convincing that my friends thought they were protecting me by following her lead. The realization hit me hardest when Olivia showed me the group chat Madison had created specifically to discuss their concerns about my behavior. Reading through the messages, I saw how masterfully Madison had manipulated every situation, every overheard conversation, every private moment into evidence of my supposed instability. But now, with Olivia on my side and Ashley aware of the pattern, I finally had a chance to unravel Madison's web of lies. With Olivia and Ashley now aware of the truth, I focused on Emma next. She had been my friend the longest, and Madison had worked especially hard to destroy that relationship. I asked Olivia to arrange a meeting with Emma, knowing that Emma would be more likely to listen if the invitation came from someone she still trusted. We met at the small park near campus where Emma and I used to have our heart-to-hearts during freshman year. The fall leaves were turning, reminding me of all the seasons of friendship we had shared before Madison came into our lives. Emma was cold at first, clearly uncomfortable being there. But then Olivia started playing the video of Madison in my room with the recording device, and Emma's whole demeanor changed. The hardest part was showing Emma the specific sections of Madison's journal that detailed how she had manipulated their friendship. Madison had carefully collected every offhand comment I'd ever made about Emma during private moments, innocent venting about small disagreements, contextless fragments of therapy sessions where I discussed our friendship dynamics and twisted them into weapons. Emma was shocked to see how Madison had meticulously planned to use these moments to drive a wedge between us. As we talked, Emma remembered something that suddenly made sense. Months ago, she had confided in Madison about her insecurities regarding her new job. Shortly after, she began receiving anonymous emails at work suggesting she was underqualified. She had been devastated but never connected it to Madison. Now, seeing Madison's pattern of manipulation, Emma realized who had likely sent those emails. The next person to join our growing circle of truth was Josh. He reached out to me independently, saying something felt off about Madison's stories. He revealed that Madison had been pushing him to host fewer movie nights, subtly suggesting that our gatherings were enabling my unhealthy behavior. Josh had resisted, which explained why Madison had recently started suggesting new venues for group hangouts, places where she had more control over the environment. Chris was the hardest to reach. Madison had done the most damage there, using my private therapy sessions where I discussed my feelings for him to make me appear obsessive. But Josh convinced him to at least look at the evidence. When Chris saw the complete context of the conversations Madison had twisted, and the notebook detailing her premeditated plan to isolate me, his guilt was palpable. The most validating moment came when Chris shared that he had recently started feeling uncomfortable with how often Madison tried to spend time alone with him after convincing him I was unstable. He had noticed her becoming more flirtatious once she thought she had successfully destroyed any chance of a relationship between us. It was another piece of her pattern: isolate her target, destroy their relationships, and then try to take what they had wanted for herself. While my friends were coming around to the truth, Madison remained oblivious to the turning tide. She continued her performance as the concerned friend, even going so far as to suggest to our professors that they should check on my mental health. But her attempts to undermine me were now meeting with skepticism rather than concern. People had started to notice the inconsistencies in her stories, the way she always seemed to have recordings or evidence of private moments that she shouldn't have been privy to. The group chat that had once been used to discuss their concerns about me was now being used to share observations about Madison's manipulative behavior. Each person had a story, a moment when something hadn't felt quite right, but they dismissed their instincts because Madison had been so convincing. Together, we were finally seeing the full picture of her calculated deception. The weekend before midterms, everything came to a head. Madison had grown increasingly agitated as her usual tactics stopped working. She couldn't understand why her carefully crafted text messages about my concerning behavior weren't getting the usual worried responses from our friends. Her frustration made her sloppy. One evening, she left her bedroom door open while she was in the shower, something she had never done before. The same protective instinct that had stopped me from confronting her immediately now told me to check her room one last time. There on her desk was a new notebook with a detailed plan for Ashley. It included schedules of when Ashley was typically alone in the research lab, notes about her insecurities that Madison had already collected, and potential ways to isolate her from her current friend group. I took photos of everything and sent them to Ashley immediately. Within an hour, Ashley had contacted her academic advisor about Madison's concerning behavior. The advisor, it turned out, had received similar reports about Madison from her previous university, but had never had enough evidence to act on them. What Madison didn't know was that while she was busy planning Ashley's isolation, our entire friend group had been documenting her behavior. Emma had kept all the anonymous emails. Josh had saved every manipulative text about the movie nights. Olivia had recorded conversations where Madison tried to share more concerns about my mental health. Even Chris had started paying attention to how Madison would try to twist casual conversations into evidence of instability. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. A first-year graduate student named Kelly, 23F, reached out to Emma after overhearing us discussing Madison at the campus coffee shop. Kelly had been Madison's roommate at her previous university and had gone through an eerily similar experience. She had tried to warn others, but Madison had already poisoned everyone against her, using the same tactics she was now using against me. Kelly had eventually been forced to transfer universities, which explained why Madison had felt safe using the same playbook here. With Kelly's testimony adding to our mounting evidence, we decided it was time to act. We coordinated with the department head and my academic advisor to schedule a meeting about the research grant Madison and I were both pursuing. Madison, thinking this was her chance to finally sabotage my academic career, eagerly agreed to attend. The day before the meeting, I did something that surprised everyone. I wrote Madison a letter. Not a confrontational one, but a simple request to talk one-on-one before the meeting. I knew she would ignore it, which was exactly what I wanted. The letter would be one final piece of evidence showing that I had attempted to address things privately before being forced to take more serious action. That night, as I sat in my room listening to Madison moving around the apartment, I felt a strange sense of calm. The recording device was still there, behind my dresser, still collecting evidence of its owner's manipulation. But now it wasn't just recording my vulnerability, it was recording my strength. Every private phone call she overheard now was part of our plan. Every conversation she recorded was another piece of evidence against her. The morning of the meeting arrived with a heavy tension in our apartment. Madison was dressed professionally, carrying her laptop and a folder I knew contained carefully selected recordings meant to discredit me. She barely glanced at me as she left, probably assuming I would be too emotionally unstable to even attend the meeting. When Madison walked into the department conference room, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Instead of just the department head and grant committee, the room was filled with faces she hadn't expected to see. Emma, Olivia, Josh, Chris, and Ashley were all there. But what made her freeze was the sight of Kelly, her former roommate, sitting quietly in the corner. The department head started the meeting by addressing the research grant applications. Madison seemed to relax slightly, pulling out her folder of evidence about my instability. But before she could speak, my academic advisor changed the subject to a series of complaints about unauthorized recording and harassment that had been filed against a student. I'll never forget the look on Madison's face when my advisor played the video of her adjusting the recording device in my room. Her practiced mask of concern cracked for just a moment, showing the calculation beneath. She tried to play it off, claiming she had been checking for a mouse infestation, but then Kelly started speaking about her own experience. One by one, everyone in the room shared their evidence. Emma presented the anonymous emails. Josh showed the texts about movie nights. Olivia explained how Madison had manipulated the group chat. Chris described how she had twisted my private therapy sessions. Ashley revealed the notebook detailing Madison's plans to target her next. The most devastating moment came when Kelly pulled out her old journal from her time as Madison's roommate. The patterns were identical, the same methods of isolation, the same tactics of recording and manipulating private conversations, even similar language in her notes about target neutralization. Madison's responses became increasingly desperate. She tried to maintain her concerned friend act, but nobody was buying it anymore. When she realized she was losing control, she switched tactics, claiming she was the real victim of a group conspiracy. But her own meticulous notes and recordings had become the evidence of her manipulation. The department head finally intervened, informing Madison that her grant application was being withdrawn. Furthermore, the university would be conducting a formal investigation into her pattern of harassment. Her academic advisor suggested she take a leave of absence to reflect on her actions. As the meeting ended, Madison tried one last time to salvage her position, turning to Chris with tears in her eyes, claiming I had manipulated everyone against her. Chris just shook his head and walked out. One by one, everyone left the room, leaving Madison alone with the ruins of her carefully constructed web of lies. That evening, when I returned to the apartment, Madison was frantically packing her things. She didn't say a word to me, but I noticed she'd left the recording device behind, still hidden behind my dresser. It felt symbolic somehow. The tool she'd used to collect others' vulnerabilities had become evidence of her own calculated cruelty. In the weeks that followed Madison's departure, our friend group went through a complex healing process. The immediate relief of exposing the truth was followed by waves of guilt, anger, and confusion as everyone processed what had happened. We had all been manipulated not just against me, but against our own instincts and better judgment. Emma moved in as my new roommate, a decision that felt right given our history of friendship. Together, we went through the apartment thoroughly, finding 2 more recording devices, one in the living room and another in the kitchen. Each discovery was like lancing a wound, painful but necessary for healing. The university's investigation revealed more victims at Madison's previous schools. Kelly's testimony had opened a floodgate of similar stories. Madison had perfected her technique over years, leaving a trail of damaged relationships and traumatized former roommates across several states. The university ultimately suspended her enrollment, and she withdrew completely rather than face a disciplinary hearing. Chris and I eventually had that coffee date we'd never gotten around to, though not in the way I'd originally hoped. We talked openly about how Madison had played on his protective instincts, and my hurt at how quickly he believed her lies. While we decided we were better as friends, the honest conversation helped restore the trust that Madison had destroyed. Olivia threw herself into researching psychological manipulation and gaslighting, turning her academic focus toward understanding how someone like Madison could so effectively twist social dynamics. She started a support group for students who had experienced similar situations, creating something positive from our collective trauma. Ashley, who had narrowly escaped becoming Madison's next victim, became a close friend. She helped me work through my lingering anxiety about trusting new people, while I helped her recognize the red flags we'd both missed in Madison's initial love-bombing behavior. The hardest part of recovery was learning to trust my own private thoughts again. For months, I felt watched even though I knew the recording devices were gone. I would catch myself whispering during phone calls or second-guessing every word I said in my own bedroom. My therapist helped me work through this, teaching me that being vulnerable isn't a weakness. It's the manipulator who carries the shame, not the person who trusted. 1 year later, our friend group is stronger than ever, though forever changed. We're more attentive to each other's boundaries, more willing to speak up when something feels off, and more aware of how precious genuine friendship is. The research grant I was working toward? I got it, and my project focuses on building resilience in graduate student communities. Sometimes I still think about Madison, wondering if she's out there starting her cycle of manipulation with a new group of unsuspecting victims. But I take comfort in knowing that our story has helped others recognize similar patterns in their own lives. The group chat that Madison once used to isolate me is now used to share moments of joy, support, and genuine connection. The recording device from behind my dresser sits in a box in my closet, a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. It's also a reminder that while trust can be weaponized by those with cruel intentions, it can also be the foundation for rebuilding something stronger than before.